Along with the anatomy and explanations of the last two videos, we need to talk about how muscle contractions of the legs create suspension of the pelvis and the entire body above that pelvis. A movement like this highlights the fact that the upper body is stacked on the pelvis, essentially free-floating in space because neither the arms or head are being held up by anything above them. As we move, the upper body wobbles around and is instantly compensated for without much of a thought on our part. This is really more amazing than we give it credit. There are, of course, complex contractions of the abs, back, neck, and arms that also make this possible. But the weight-bearing point we'll focus on is at the lowest part. The pelvis is suspended in the middle of the legs by the femurs and their muscles. The femurs attach to the pelvis to create the hip joint. The rectus femoris attaches to the pelvis above the hip joint, the hamstrings below the hip joint. The adductors attach at the pubic bone region, inside or medial to the hip joint. Gluteus medius, minimus, and TFL attach at the side of the pelvis, lateral to the hip joint. And the gluteus maximus attaches to the upper back part of the pelvis, posterior to the hip joint. Each attachment represents a different direction that the muscle can pull on the pelvis to help balance it. Balance it against a movement coming from the legs, or when pressed on by weight shifts from the body above. With the hip joint being the point the pelvis rotates around. The rectus femoris can resist the pelvis tilting backwards. The hamstrings resist forward movements. The adductors resist lateral twists. The gluteus medius, minimus, and TFL resist pelvis inferior tilt on the opposite side. And the gluteus maximus resists anterior tilt. Miraculously, each of these work unconsciously, constantly, and usually simultaneously in movements like this to keep the body balanced. Now, this is all of course dependent on the femur having a strong and stable base, and in this case, that base will come from the true leg and feet. Not that this needed to be any more complicated.